welcome Simon Duffy from the Center for Welfare Reform and the Citizen Network. I just, when I talked about Markku Niemelä, who was presenting in the morning, I said that you have this similar feature with Markku, that you both have taught a lot and done a lot. And I think that that sort of describes your work quite well also. And I also mentioned that when I started in KBPS in 2009, and I remember listening Markku Niemelä's presentations a lot about his work, and I think that it was 2009 or 2010 when you were in Finland giving your presentation in one of our seminars, and we have been working a lot since then, and you have been supporting our change in Finland also, so thank you for that. But I give the floor to you, and we agreed that I can intervene your presentation, so people can write their questions, thoughts, ideas to the chat, and we can ask you questions during your presentation. Eli te voitte kirjoittaa tuonne chatboxiin ajatuksia, kysymyksiä, ideoita, ja sitten mä niitä tässä lueskelen Simonille, tai voin keskeyttää Simonin esityksen ja käydään niitä sitten yhdessä läpi, tai sitten voitte toki myöskin nostaa sen käden ja kysyä kesken kaiken. But Simon, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Petra. Kiitos. Okay. So it's lovely to be kind of in Finland. My wife and I were just thinking at the weekend how much we would love to be back in Finland now, watching a documentary on British television. But anyway, we're here in a very wet Sheffield, and I'm going to try and talk about personal budgets and self-directed support. And I've described it as what are the sticky issues, and that I was trying to think about the things that are really important for making self-directed support human, for making it work properly, and also the issues that sometimes people try to avoid, or by the wrong kind of compromises, you end up almost making the system a bit worthless. So I'm hoping that these things will be good pointers for you, so that you can, as you're developing systems, as you're thinking about what's the right way to handle problems, maybe this will be a good structure or things that to check things back by now. So this is the slide that tells you what I'm going to say. So there are, as often with me, there are 7 things that I'm going to talk about. But number 1 is telling people their budget, knowing how much money you have. Number 2 is giving people real flexibility in how to spend it. Number 3 is connecting people to other people. So not leaving people as individuals, but making sure people are connected, particularly connected to peers, to other people going through similar experiences. Number 4, help the organizations, support organizations, community organizations to get involved and play a role. Number 5, trust the social workers. This is not about harming social workers or reducing their role. It's about actually enabling them to do their work really well. Number 6, think about neighborhoods. Organize where you can by neighborhoods. By neighborhoods, I mean the small localities in which a lot of life goes on, but which sometimes social services forgets about. And number 7, be accountable, be transparent, be prepared to learn from the process and to change how things work so that they work better. So those are the kind of 7 key messages. I'll see if I can say a little bit more to help explain why each is, I think, important. So what is my budget? Well, one thing to remember about the budget is that it is an entitlement. So if we think about self-directed support really as a shift from a model which says, hey, oh, you're somebody with a disability, you have problems, hey, we have solutions, we're going to put you in this service, or we think this is right for you, or even, well, you can have a little bit of choice, we'll give you a voucher and you can choose between this and this and this, then that really just leaves the person not really as a citizen, not really as somebody with rights and clarity and control, but just as somebody who's passive, who waits for the gift of services. What we're interested in is this shift to citizenship. How do we enable the person to be leading their own life, working with their community, establishing themselves as a member of that community? Well, one of the elements of this is that the money, which in the gift model is kind of really seen as belonging to the government or maybe to professionals, we actually say this is your money. To families, to disabled people, this is your money, and it's your money as an entitlement because of your human rights, because of the UN Convention, and because of how Finland commits to convert the convention into real practical rights. Then this budget is your money. So and this is always a thing that systems are very unhappy with, actually. It always is an area where the system keeps wanting to come back and say, oh no, it's government money, it's government money. But is it government money? I mean, are your wages government money because at some point they went through the taxpayer? No, it's agreed that this becomes your money. So there's no real reason why, similarly, these entitlements should not be the person's money. And you need to watch for this dangerous slipperiness by which the system says, oh, yes, you will have a personal budget, but oh, actually, this is still our money. We can still decide how it's used. You might have a little bit of control. Well, this is very dangerous, I think. And it's dangerous because it changes the culture, the thinking, the attitudes we have about what's going on. But it's also dangerous because it often leads to us undermining the practical advantage of a personal budget. So what this slide is trying to do is think more in terms of the process about how people use money. Now, in the old system, and again, I know with vouchers, this is not as extreme as what I'm putting up here, because in vouchers you get little bits of choice. But even with vouchers, still basically the model on the top here, the old model, this is basically what's going on. So you are assessed in some way. You are told, right, okay, how big is your disability? How complex is it? What else is going on? Okay, we've decided this is what you need to have happen. So we'll do some planning. So we come up with a plan or proposal, or we find you a service and they will do the planning, and you will go inside the service, and then we will check and we will review that service is okay. This is the kind of service system model. Service first, person a long way second. And of course, in this system, the money is really invisible. It's not something that's seen as the person's right, and the person is not able to really say, oh, well, I'd quite like to do this, or I'd like to do that. So one of the fundamental transformations about personal budgets is that we start saying, no, hang on. Number one, this is your budget. And if it's a real budget, then we'll tell you what it is. There are some interesting questions about how to do that. And, we've written more about that. I'm not going to focus on the how so much, but just making sure that people know is really important, because when you know, then you're able to plan meaningfully. You're able to actually say, oh, what would be a good use of this? What would be a better use of this? Maybe we're doing, one of the things that happened a lot when we started to do this in Scotland and in England was, first of all, people were really surprised how much money was being spent on services often people didn't really value. And when you say, well, you're getting this, you're going to a day centre, or you're getting this residential care service and it costs 30,000 euros, 40,000 euros, people going, oh my goodness, oh, I'm sure I could do a bit better than that. Or maybe I'm not sure, but at least let me think about it. At least let me explore what my options are. And of course, this then takes us to beyond planning into doing and changing and getting involved in the community life. And then, of course, the fact that the money is money means that we can start to invest in our community life in different ways. So we don't just have to think about what services are on offer. We can talk about, how do we get involved in the community? How could we use this money in the community? And that's how we then build a better life. So a good test of a good system is, do people know their budgets in this system? And the second, very connected but important issue, is that are people then free to use that budget flexibly? This is really important because this is where the efficiency comes. And sometimes we don't like efficiency sometimes in the old world, because efficiency sometimes sounds like cuts, or we're just going to push people's wages down. But actually efficiency in the world we want to go to is quite an exciting concept, because efficiency really means spending the money on the right things. And when you actually examine where the efficiencies in self-directed support are, they're not about spending less on staff costs, cutting out management costs. Those are not the real efficiencies. The real efficiencies are doing things that build on your gifts, your talents, the things that you're excited about. If you spend money doing things that people really want to do, then it's much easier to spend the money wisely. If you spend money in ways that connect people to the community that they are, that they've already built up, and if you strengthen that community with people, I can see Eleanor Antikainen is waiting to be admitted on my screen. Hello, Eleanor.
At this point, it is. I have one question. If you are talking about efficiency, in Finland, we are talking a lot about impacts of the services. So, is there a difference between efficiency and impacts? Eli onko tehokkuudella ja vaikuttavuudella eroa?
Is there an efficiency between? Yeah. Well, I think, that's a really good question, Petra. And I think the talking about impacts of services is a little bit old world thinking. We did some research on the work that an organisation that I set up in Glasgow called Inclusion Glasgow, where we help people leave institutions in the 1990s with an individual budget and where we designed support around people. Now, if you look at the impacts in the research, they were very, very positive. So you could say, well, that was the impact of the service. But then we asked people another question, which is, who was it who helped you bring about these positive changes in your life? Now, interestingly, when we asked that, I think from memory, about 30% of the positive impact was put down to the service. So the other 70% was put down to things like myself, my family, friends, volunteering, my job, or other things that are going on in the community. Now, I would argue that that was part of the success of Inclusion Glasgow, because what we did was we enabled people to be citizens. So we enabled people to get their support from the right place for themselves. So this impact from services is a little bit dangerous if it starts to assume that it's the service that's doing the work. It's the person that's doing the work if we're doing our job right. It's the person, their family, their community. What we're doing is enabling that. So I think that it's obviously what we're really interested in, of course, that maybe the both models, impact models and self-directed support share, is understanding what's really valuable to measure. And that's another issue, which I'll come back to a little bit. But for me, it's really important that we focus on the citizenship impacts. So are we actually strengthening people's citizenship? And sometimes how we measure that, I think, is very important. So it is important to measure and to think and understand what's going on. But I think service impact is a slippery concept for me. Efficiency is about making things better. So what we found in this, I'll show you one other slide that goes with this, but this model here is really saying, and it was John O'Brien who pushed me towards this push economics. So he was saying to me, this is a really good way of explaining the efficiencies. In the old model, what we do is we decide what's important and then we measure whether it worked. In the new model, people decide what's important. We give them resources so that they can build on their real wealth. They can build on their relationships, their place in community, their own resources, their own gifts, their own spirit of resilience. And that's how a good life is created. So for me, that's a bit of the tension. I think when we start to talk about impact of services, we've put the person back into their box. What we want is get people out of the box and recognize they are the primary agent. Yeah, how do people use services is an interesting question. But the impact of services is a little bit dangerous, I'd say. And this is data that I've shared from 2 different reports, and it was particularly about day services. But again, I think it's very interesting because you see that a lot of the ways people use money are really just about building a better community life. And is that a service impact? Well, at some level it is, because we've created a service based on the person being an agent. But also it's not. It's a citizen impact. It's a citizen impact, and it's the citizen's impact not only on their own life, but also their positive impact on their community. I mean, at a very modest level, if you with your budget are able to go and use ordinary leisure facilities in your municipality in Finland, then those facilities are more likely to flourish. And of course, people can get involved in much more meaningful ways than just being a customer. But even at that little level, by converting people's economic input into a community-focused one, we're actually strengthening the community itself. So I think of it as more about correct investment and efficiency being a kind of, how do we invest back in ourselves, in our citizenship, in our community, not the efficiency of the service or the service impact. I hope that makes some kind of sense, Petra.
It really does. Thank you.
So the other thing, if this is me, I want to know, what is my budget? What can I do with it? But the big thing as well that we often forget in services is people really learn through finding out what other people are doing, and peer support and peer-to-peer connections, I think, are so important. If I look back on the work that I have done over the last 20 or 30 years, I would say what I've learned in the last 10 years is that peer support, that I underestimated the importance of peer support in the first 20 years. If I could go back in time, I would build more and more peer support into the work that I did. Because one of the things I think is, and of course the idea of a peer is a little bit flexible. What is a peer? You and I are peers because we're all people who work in social services, maybe in some way. So there's all sorts of peers and different ways of talking about people. But I think it is fairly true that people listen best and learn best from people they think are like them, in the same situation as them. I think if you're a social worker and you go and talk to a family and you say, hey, you've got this budget now, maybe you'd like to think about employing personal assistants, or maybe you'd like to think about using that money more creatively to help your son get a job, or help your son be a volunteer, or learn new skills, or all the things that you could do with a budget. I think you will be listened to, but I think another family member who says, hey, you know, our son did this with his budget, or our daughter did this, or if somebody, a self-advocate, says, hey, I've got a personal assistant now, it's really working well for me, I think that has much, much more impact on people's ears. I think that people will go, oh, right, yeah, and take it much more seriously. And maybe that's a little bit sad for professionals to hear, but I think it doesn't mean that professionals have no role. I think what it means is that we have to start thinking about our role as being helping to grow these systems of peer support. So this image here, it comes from a brilliant organization in Doncaster, which is quite close to where I live in Sheffield in the north of England. It's another town about 15 miles away. And my friends there, they have, many of them have disabilities, mental health problems. And a few years ago, about 10 years ago, in fact, I was just talking to the group yesterday, 10 years ago, they were fighting to have personal budgets, and they were campaigning for personal budgets. So that's one of the things this group does. But what they discovered was that they also could be supporting each other. They could also be changing their community together. They could also be learning about how things work and changing those things together. That system of peer support seems to me to be really more powerful than the personal budgets, because actually people can help each other even when they have very limited resources. So still people get personal budgets and still people use them, and they benefit from being able to learn from each other. But personal budgets doesn't become the main thing. The main thing becomes the power that they're creating together, the fellowship that they get from each other, the mutual support, and their ability to then bring about bigger changes. I think that's what makes people feel really powerful. So I would now say that, you know, try wherever you can to build peer support into the work.
There is one question in the chat box. So how widely is personal budgets, self-directed support used in England, in UK, and if you can also, because in Finnish language we don't have the sort of the terminology yet, so we have personal budgets, that's henkilökohtainen budjetointi, but we don't have a really good term for self-directed support. So could you tell the difference between that and so how widely is it used? So is it so that all people are using it?
Yes. Yeah. So let me start at the second question. So self-directed support is meant to describe the new system in which a budget is a bit of the system. So yes, we've struggled with Suunta and with the European work we're doing. Self-directed support is ugly English because we're putting lots of words together, but in a way it's kind of obvious what it means. It's how do we support people so that the person is in control, the person is directing themselves, and obviously that's got to be more than about a budget. A budget is just one little element. We talked about self-directed support as the change when I was running the program for this in England, and in Scotland the legal changes were to create a system of self-directed support. So in Scotland, the new law for social services is the Self-Directed Support Act, and all of this is thought about as a change for the whole system. In England, the politicians kind of preferred the budget word, and they focused on the budget word. And for me, I thought that was a little bit of a loss. So what happens sometimes is that people don't think about, hey, how are we supporting people? Hey, what's the role for professionals? Hey, what are the checks and balances and other systems here? So I think it is very important, even though there's no word for it in Finland. It's very important to think systemically. And so it would be good to have a Finnish word for it, Petra, but we have struggled, haven't we? But that's the distinction between the system and just one little element, which is a budget, which is just one financial transaction. In terms of the numbers, in England, it's supposed to be for everyone. It's a little bit like deinstitutionalization, though. You know, when you say, oh, we're not doing institutions anymore, and yet somehow it seems quite a long struggle to close the old institutions. And we're still in that phase. And since 2010, we elected a very right-wing government in 2010, and you may have noticed we keep re-electing them. And they've been cutting the budgets for social services very extremely, and they're not interested in self-directed support in the way that the previous governments were. So we've kind of got a bit stuck at about 25% of people. It depends a bit how you count the numbers. So it's something like 25%, or if you're charitable with the numbers, you could say about 50% of people are in a system of self-directed support in England. But I don't want to go much deeper into that rabbit hole with Winnie the Pooh down the rabbit hole. It's been a big change, but it hasn't been a complete change. And residential care, so money for services where people go inside a home, although this was not my advice when I had some influence, they've kind of opted out of the system. So this is to do with the politics and economics of social care in England at the moment. It's not in a very good place.
Yeah, but we have good models from all over the world and from EU. So of course you have some good examples, and then in Belgium we have something, in Australia, New Zealand, Canada.
Yeah, I mean, this is, so we have on the website, we have an interview with John O'Brien and Robin Cooper, who are two people from the USA. The USA is where this started. 1965, California is actually where all of this started. Because one of the first things about independent living was saying, well, I need control of my budget. And I asked John and Robin, where in the United States was the best practice? And they said, well, it's still in California. And there's still work being done there 50 years later. So I think that it's good news, bad news. The changes aren't quick. They're not a simple push a button and everything will be okay. People have been working at this for a long time. There are lots of good examples, but there is no perfect system. Yeah. Okay. So the fourth thing is getting organizations involved. And I'm thinking mostly here about support providers, but it could be much wider than that. One of the innovations we developed in Glasgow was this idea of an individual service fund, which was really, it's like a personal budget that's managed inside an organization. And I think this is kind of the model that KVPS used in some of the early piloting in Finland. I think it's really important to welcome this, to not see this as some kind of low-level innovation. I think a lot of people with disabilities and families, they want control, but they do need help with some of the details. And they need community organizations to work with them. They don't always want to be an employer of staff, but they do want to have more influence over who is supporting them. They don't want to necessarily manage insurance and manage employment law and payroll. And so actually quite happy for organizations to take on some of that so that they can do the important things about living a good life and finding a better way forward. So I think this is a really important element of this in a system of self-directed support. Really, another way of thinking about this is who is managing the budget. Often we find that countries often go, oh, well, okay, in the moment, we, the government, have to do it. And then people with disabilities say, hey, no, we can do it too. And so we say, oh, all right, then. We'll set up a personal budget system or a personal assistance system that allows individuals with disabilities, but it must only be individuals. It can't be family, it can't be peers, it can't be community, it can't be services. Why? So I would say what you want to set up in Finland is a system where all of those options are possible. In Scottish law, they talk about it in a kind of, you can manage your own personal budget, somebody can manage the budget for you, or the government can manage the budget for you. So covering all those options in a kind of simple way. I think this is really important.
Yeah, so in Finland, it might be, of course, we have this system change going on from municipalities to sort of like provinces, kunnista laajemmille alueille, hyvinvointialueille, mitä ne nyt sitten onkin. So there would be NGOs would have a role, eli järjestöillä voisi olla rooli, and then of course the social workers, service guidance, palveluohjaajilla, sosiaalityöntekijöillä, and also some companies maybe, not-profit companies, and of course some other companies might think of that opportunity as well.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, in a way, if there's, well, if I skip forward, one of my fears for Finland is that you become too disconnected from the local community. You know, really a lot of this actually can be done in the fabric of the community life. If you make self-directed support of the personal budget system simple enough and smart enough, then it really should be part of the fabric of neighborhood life. If we're not careful, these systems become very, very bureaucratic, and that the decisions are made many miles away. And in the provinces of Finland will still be huge geographical areas. So I think it's going to be really important to think about what role the community plays in this. You know, the whole thing is meant to be about enabling people to be citizens. It's meant to be based on disability rights and somebody as included in their community. So why have not families, local businesses, local community associations, why aren't they part of the texture of the solution, I think?
That's really important question for and thing to think about in our projects at the moment, I think.
Yeah, because I think that if you get the scale wrong, Petra, your imagination changes. If you get the scale too big, then you start to think about, right, well, we need social services to do this, and we'll need some service providers to do this, and we'll need, you know, our social workers will have to use these procedures, and suddenly you're thinking at a scale where, you know, what's going on in that local community is just never going to enter anybody's mind. The skills and assets of a community are just never going to be part of the story. It's all going to be described back in a kind of bureaucratic language. And I think that's a worry for me, because this is really meant to be about changing people's presence in their community. Yeah, so I worry about that. I'm just going to go back to the other kind of critical question, which I don't know if this is going to happen in Finland, but in England, one of the negative things that happened with personal budgets is I think that managers sometimes started to use the system to take even more power away from social workers. We're still in a phase where social workers have been, they've been commodified. They've been kind of told, oh no, your job is only this or only this, and you've got to do this kind of assessment, this kind of planning. And the job has become very, very controlled by government. And in the early days of personal budgets, lots of people saying, the problem is the social workers. Social workers will not give people freedom, will not give people flexibility or creativity. What we need to do is in a way push them out of the system and replace them with, sometimes we talked about support brokers or other creative community facilitators, planners. I think this is incredibly unhelpful, personally. I think that the social workers are some of the people who can really benefit from a good system of self-directed support, because it can really give them back their power to do the best job. And I think that the challenge is that for social workers, which is part of social work ethics, but sometimes I think in systems, the system doesn't pay attention to social work ethics. Social work ethics says we have to work with every individual flexibly. We have to provide only the support that we should be providing. We should not be providing standardized solutions. That's what the ethics say. But often the system says, no, you've got to do it like this. You have process A, process B, process C. I think if we do self-directed support right, it's a chance to think about social work differently. This slide is a way of saying, let's think about social workers, the social worker who turns up and is working with an individual or working with a family. Let's think about them as being able to operate in a multi-dimensional way. So first of all, of course, we want social workers to be facilitative. We want them to enable people to do things for themselves. But good things that social workers can almost always do are give people good information, connect people to their peers, to other people, to other families. That should be a kind of basic professional duty. If you're working with somebody, you've got to see part of your job as connecting them to somebody else who can share their experiences. Connecting them to good community organizations. Again, in England, sometimes social workers have been told, no, you can't recommend a service because it would be contrary to procurement rules. I don't know if you have the same problem in Finland, but this is crazy. If you're a social worker and you know your community and you know that this person or this organization has exactly the right kind of skills to help this family, then it's part of your job, it's part of your professional duty to link those people up, I think. And so connecting people to communities, connecting people to good support providers should be essential facilitative things that social workers do. But also, you know, sometimes maybe 1 in 5 cases, that won't be enough. And the social worker will need to kind of roll their sleeves up, and they will be there working with the family, solving problems, dealing with urgent things that are going on. And there should be no problem with that. That's often what families really need. They don't want, what we say in English, to go around the houses. We don't want to make this process really unnecessarily complex. If you're sitting in somebody's kitchen or in somebody's living room and there's a real problem, then you want to help that person solve that problem in the best way for them. So you don't always want to be referring people to other people. Sometimes you just have to do the work yourself. And we should design the system so that it really can use the best skills that social workers bring. So I've talked about this one. I'm going to, I mean, this is a model which is called local area coordination, which is maybe not, this doesn't necessarily seem to be about personal budgets, but I think it's something we should be thinking about alongside inside our systems of self-directed support. Local area coordination is a model that started in Australia in the 1980s. And really what it means is that in each community, there's one person, the local area coordinator, whose job is to connect with people, to make sure that people don't have the kind of crises that lead people to end up using services or using the wrong kind of services or leaving their community. So at the top, you know, this is a common model in England. If what happens is social services get involved too late, after the problems have started to occur in somebody's life. And then the response is to push people into services that themselves are not really strengthening that person's life as a citizen, and often themselves lead to further problems, anger, upset, and sometimes then more congregation, more isolation. Local area coordination says, no, we need presence in our communities now. We need somebody in that community now who's looking around and making sure that people can solve their own problems, or that they're connected to community groups, or that families and have information they need. I think this is, I think for Finland, it'd be good to start thinking about these systems too as part of the change, so that we're already starting to think about how does self-directed support and personal budgets connect up with community. Maybe local area coordination isn't the exact right model, but something like that I think is going to be important if we're going to make sure that we don't float away from community life. And the last thing, I suppose, is I talked about this as accountability. I didn't really have a good graphic for how of accountability. There are a lot of issues. How big the budget should be, it becomes an issue. What the rules are for flexibility becomes an issue. What roles people can play. In a way, everything that we've talked about, the details that we've talked about so far, you will be, and the new provinces and the new leadership and the national government in Finland, you'll be making all sorts of decisions about this. I suppose the simple point I want to make is that it's really important that you stay accountable to people with disabilities, that they are shaping this, that they are working through these ideas, that families are involved in working through these ideas, and that you learn what's working and what's not working. So this model, which is the 7 keys to citizenship model, would be maybe a good way of checking whether the system is working. Are people having meaningful lives? Are they doing things they value? Are people free? Do people have, are people in poverty, or are they free from poverty? Have people got good homes? Are people getting good assistance? Are people involved in the community? Have people got good relationships? These are the kind of things that we should be thinking about. And we should measure the system by these kind of outcomes. If those kind of outcomes are not being achieved, the problem is probably not disabled people, the problem is not families, the problem is not social workers. The problem will be that we've designed the system wrong. And if we make the system design kind of hidden in a box, and we say, no, this is the law and we can't control any of it, this is just what we have to do, then all of that becomes harder to change. So by accountability, I mean kind of, let's try and convert these systems into things that we as a community can talk about, can learn, and can change together. That's probably all my slides, I think. There we go. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think that now we have time for questions. I just make a very a briefing of your presentation in Finnish, if you don't mind. So that gives time to people to think a little bit about their questions. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing that you were talking about, that money belongs to people, eli raha kuuluu ihmiselle, eli se raha, mitä budjetissa on, niin se ihmisten pitäisi saada käyttää itse katsomallaan tavalla semmoiseen tukeen ja palveluihin, joita hän tarvitsee. And the other thing you said was that this personal budget is only part of the bigger change of self-directed support, citizenships, neighborhood change, and it should be easy to use. Eli budjetti on vain osa sitä isompaa muutosta, eli se rahasumma on sinänsä vain pieni asia, vaan sen kaiken pitäisi kietoutua sen kansalaisuuden ja kontrollin ympärille, niin että ihmisellä itsellään on mahdollisimman paljon sitä valtaa ja kontrollia, ei systeemillä kohti ihmistä. And then you talked about the meaning of the peer support. So, and neighborhoods, how we can and should develop neighborhoods and peer support at the same time. Eli miten me pystytään kehittämään erilaisia vertaistuen muotoja ja yhteisöjä, joissa henkilökohtainen budjetti on sitten vaan ikään kuin se mekanismi. And you talked about the role of the social workers, so that it should be sort of, they should be able to do their job as good as they can, so that their role is important and it should be not be administrative, as to say. Eli se sosiaalityöntekijöiden rooli on myöskin tosi tärkeä siinä, että miten he saa tehdä sitä työtä niin, että sillä on niin kuin merkitystä ihmisille ja se ei ole liian niin kuin hallinnollinen. And then you talked about that there should be many opportunities and for the support, so that when people are in this sort of model and they have the personal budgets, they should be allowed to have many kind of support, even if it's NGOs or it's a local area coordination or something like that. Eli siellä yhteisöissä pitäisi olla mahdollisimman paljon erilaisia niin kuin mahdollisuuksia tukeen ja ratkaisuihin, miten sitä budjettia käyttää. Eli siinäkään ei ajateltaisi niin, että yksi systeemi sopii kaikille. And then you talked about this accountability. So does the system work, and how we should constantly develop it together with the people? So it's almost like how to develop the system responsibly. Eli miten sitä, saadaanko sillä mallilla aikaan niitä vaikutuksia, joita sillä tavoitellaan, ja miten sitä arvioidaan. So these were my thoughts about your presentation. And if any of you would like to comment, question, share your ideas, this is a perfect time for that. Eli nyt on hyvä aika joko siellä chatissa laittaa kysymyksiä tai nyt voi olla ehkä hyvä aika myös laittaa kamerat päälle, niin ihmiset näkevät toinen toisiaan. I asked people to open the videos also, so it's perhaps easier for you also to see people who are online.
Yeah, friendly faces, familiar faces. That was a good summary, Petra.
It was easy to do. It was, your presentations are always so easy to follow.
I mean, I don't know how it's going, you might want to say to me, but the last point about almost how the systems are developed, as I understand it, you're in the middle of that kind of, well, what should this look like? How are we going to do this? Questioning. And I think that how you collaborate is very important at this point. I mean, if there are different things going on in Finland, then it's really good to kind of understand what different things people are testing out, and for it not to become a kind of religious division, you know, oh, they're doing this and we're doing it, but as much as you can to keep a spirit of experimentation alive is really good, and just recognize it as, hey, we're doing this. Oh, that's interesting, we're trying this. I think that's a really good thing to be thinking about at the stage you're at, but also how people and families are involved in this process. And I think, sorry, I'm repeating myself, but I found that when we had these moments in, well, I think a lot of the time, you see that there's a positive goal, but sometimes people start to pick on groups. And I found like social workers becomes one of these groups that people start to go, the problem is you. And it isn't the social worker that's the problem. But what happens is actually we start to almost, instead of trying to understand why people sometimes behave in ways that are the way the system tells them to behave, we start blaming a professional group or a particular kind of organization. So you're the problem. And I think a lot of the creativity we need is to build solutions where everybody's got a positive role and everybody can bring the best from themselves. Does that make sense? So I'm used to Finnish silence in my talks. But.
Do you have any questions? Would anyone like to comment?
Hello, Simon. I'm Nina.
Oh, hi,
Maybe...
Nina. Yes.
Hi. I don't know. It's so difficult to start speaking English, even when I'm watching YouTube all the time in English. One thing what I was thinking when I was listening to you, that this peer support, and we have this project in Kehitysvammaliitto, and they noticed that people who were living supported housing, is it that the right word? Supported housing. Those supporters are not allowed to give their help to these peer groups or these kind of things. They only help them with like shopping and cooking, but not what's the word, liittyä yhteisöön. Mikäs tämä nyt onkaan tämä sana? Can you help me, Petra?
Join the community, the local community, be part of that.
Yes, and it's not part of their work. That's what we noticed. It's only this kind of domestic work what they can do, nothing else, and that made us quite sad.
Yeah.
Did you understand me, Simon, what I said? Did you understand?
I think it's become quite normal in systems in these top-down systems for people to say, "Oh, we will pay for these people to do that kind of work."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, really, we should be trying to destroy those kind of segmentations.
Yes.
Because if we really think about the individual in a community, then who is to decide where the gifts come from? Who is to decide where the wisdom is? It's crazy. What we want to do is encourage connection, love, friendship, creativity in every space. So why would we be saying to people, no, your job is to come in and you can do the cleaning, but that's it.
Yeah.
And we do kind of understand where this comes from in the bureaucratic mentality and in the funding regulations and all of that. But this is a good test for whether you're really doing self-directed support. If self-directed support really starts to work, then you can kind of blow those systems up. Really, because the money should really be going to the person, and the person saying, I'm going to create a system that works for me. And support providers also should be throwing those rules out, because when they're working with people, they should be looking to, how can we make sure that what we do has the maximum benefit? How are we, how are we teaching people skills? How are we connecting people? How are we encouraging and inspiring people? How are we building their role in the community? All those questions should be around. We should not have people coming in like little robots, just doing the cleaning, or I'm cooking you a meal. That's a failure, isn't it? It's a failure to really use our human intelligence and our human gifts in the right way. So it might seem like a different problem to self-directed support, but really it's the kind of problem that self-directed support should be. It's a good test for whether what you're doing is working. If it's working, those things start exploding. Nobody wants to do that anymore. If it's not working, then those systems will still be in place.
Yes.
And I think that it's good to remember that in our current systems, in municipalities, in people's lives, we already have sort of solutions that already work, even if we don't have self-directed support yet. So it's important to identify what are the things that make it work, because it usually is so that people, sort of the support and services meet people's needs, and they have had the power to define the support, and the family members and the peer support and the local neighborhoods are there. So we already have many good examples on that. This sort of new model just gives us new tool to spread that, and to also fix the things perhaps for some people who it's not working so well at the moment.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Petra. Another way of thinking about this is ecologically. Like, this is a kind of, you're trying to create, like it would be like trying to create a garden where we know that we're using our resources more intelligently, but you still want to make sure that you protect the most beautiful plants in your garden. It would be crazy to think that this is just a system and you set the system up and everything good will just happen because of the system. No, you design it so that it nurtures and protects and supports the things you value.
It's true.
I like this garden metaphor a lot.
Yeah.
Onko jollain muilla kysymyksiä, kommentteja? do you still have any questions or comments, ideas for Simon?
Well, I think that we have to be very patient because it's going to take at least 50 years or something like that to develop this kind of change and to create new culture and so on. But first steps we have to take first.
Yeah, it is kind of, it's for me, it's strange that when it's dated, self-directed support, it's as old as me, which I'm now 55, because that's where 1965 seems to be the point where there was the first system. So that's kind of sad. But as you say, Markku, like in a way, then it just teaches us that this is part of the long journey of deinstitutionalization, and it's a human thing, and it's to do, you know, it isn't a simple system fix, it is a human thing. I think that in Finland, I have this optimism about Finland because of your appreciation of good design and of your appreciation of the small. And I think that in Finland, you could avoid some of the worst disasters or system problems if you're smart, because I think your values, the things you value in life, are already there. If you make this system very Finnish, it will be very beautiful. I think you have to avoid the temptation to make it too, I don't know, bureaucratic, Anglo-Saxon, commercial in some way. All those pressures to do something modern, and lots of people, we wasted nearly £500 million, so that's over €500 million, with government saying, oh, we're going to have new computer systems and new, you know, or we'll bring in these experts, and they brought in all these consultants, and you don't need any of that. You need to use your Finnish common sense. You need to understand what you already value, the beautiful things you've already created. How do we make more of that? Well, of course, that will be about getting more power and control into people's hands. And that's what this will do. But it work in the spirit of Finland, and you'll end up with something fantastic. And it maybe take less than 50 years, Markku. I'm hoping maybe, 5, 10.
Yeah, and if systems are for the people, people are really making the systems. So this is a perfect group of people who are sort of accelerating the change. And that's sort of the meaning of the citizen network that, Simon, you've founded and are organizing it. So it really, it's not just happening somewhere. It's people are making it. And that's why we need to have this common understanding about what's the good design and what are the things that we really appreciate.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. So, Simon, do you still want to say something, or?
No, moi moi. I'm going to have another cup of coffee, Garvey, and you get on with your morning. It's been lovely to be virtually in Finland, and I hope, I don't know, maybe sometime this year or maybe next year to be back with you.
Hope to see you soon again, and thank you very much for your presentation, and have a nice week.
Thank you. You too. Good luck. Bye.